dengan tema Is Indonesia Still Aspiring to International Leadership bersama Profesor Leo Suryadinata, Ph.D. Oke, selamat sore hadirin sekalian. Selamat datang di acara Studium Generale dengan tema Is Indonesia Still Aspiring to International Leadership bersama Profesor Leo Suryadinata, Ph.D. Acara ini terselenggara atas kerjasama antara Departemen Ilmu HI, FISIP UI dengan prioritas riset nasional Kementerian Riset dan Teknologi atau BRIN dengan judul Kerjasama Selatan-Selatan. Perkenalkan, nama saya Muhammad Noval Musri sebagai mahasiswa S2 Program Studi Hubungan Internasional, Program Studi Hubungan Internasional Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik Angkatan 2020 yang akan menjadi host di dialog seri ini. Dialog ini dapat diikuti melalui Zoom webinar, FISIP Departemen Hubungan Internasional Universitas Indonesia, dan live streaming melalui akun YouTube FISIP Departemen Hubungan Internasional Universitas Indonesia. Sebelum acara dimulai, saya harapkan peserta Studium Generale dengan tema Is Indonesia Still Aspiring to International Leadership dapat memenuhi beberapa aturan di acara ini demi terselenggaranya acara dengan baik. Yang pertama, seluruh peserta diharapkan mengikuti acara dengan baik, memasang background acara yang telah disediakan, dan selalu memastikan posisi mic dalam keadaan mute. Yang kedua, tanya jawab akan dipimpin oleh moderator dengan hanya penanya yang terpilih yang dapat memberikan pertanyaan baik melalui Q&A di Zoom dan live question di YouTube. Apabila terdapat permasalahan teknis serius, maka acara akan dialihkan kepada live streaming melalui akun YouTube FISIP Departemen Hubungan Internasional Universitas Indonesia. Kami akan berusaha menampung sebanyak mungkin pertanyaan dalam waktu singkat yang tersedia. Atas perhatiannya, saya ucapkan terima kasih. Kemudian saya ucapkan banyak terima kasih kepada seluruh peserta yang sudah hadir di hari yang berbahagia ini untuk bersama-sama mengikuti Studium Generale dari Profesor Leo Suryadinata, Ph.D. Tak lupa juga saya ucapkan terima kasih kepada Kepala Departemen Ilmu Hubungan Internasional, Ibu Asra Firgianita. Selain itu, saya juga ingin menyapa dosen dan alumni HIUI yang telah hadir dan segenap peserta yang telah mempersiapkan untuk mengikuti acara ini dengan baik. Oke, adapun kegiatan Studium Generale ini akan dipandu oleh moderator kita, yakni Bapak Haryadi Wirawan Ph.D. atau yang lebih akrab disapa dengan Mas Har. Selamat siang, Mas Har. Oke. Mas Har adalah salah satu dosen senior di Departemen Ilmu Hubungan Internasional FISIP UI. Beliau mengampu beberapa mata kuliah terkait diplomasi dan memiliki minat riset terkait isu-isu hubungan internasional di kawasan Asia Tenggara dan Asia Selatan. Tanpa memakan waktu lama, saya persilakan Mas Haryadi untuk memoderatori sesi Studium Generale ini. Silakan Mas Haryadi.
Ya, terima kasih, Dek. Kita akan memulai Studium Generale ini bersama Profesor Leo Suryadinata, Ph.D. Tentu saja kita akan mendengar terlebih dahulu presentasi yang akan beliau bawakan dengan judul Is Indonesia Still Aspiring to the International Leadership? Ya, karena itu saya persilakan Profesor Leo untuk memulai presentasinya. Please.
Yes. May I see the slide, please? Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good afternoon. It is an honor for me to be invited to give a webinar at the University of Indonesia. As I was also a graduate from UI, but not from the Faculty of Social Sciences, but from the Department of History. After I left Indonesia, I moved away from history to comparative politics and international relations. However, I still think history is very important, yeah, especially the history research that I conducted at UI on Indonesia, especially Indonesian nationalism and so forth. Today, I would like to share with you my interpretation of Indonesian foreign policy, with special reference to the following topic: is Indonesia still aspiring to international leadership? Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. From the topic, you can see that in the past, Indonesia played a leading role in international politics, especially during the Sukhano era. As all of you know, when we talk about Indonesian foreign policy, it's always linked to the domestic politics and the leader, especially the ideology of the leader. And Sukhano's foreign policy has been described as a militant foreign policy. In fact, this ideology is so important. The personality is also important. I'm quite sure that some of you are familiar with Herbert Fifth, an Indonesian specialist in Australia who published a book, a very impressive book called The Decline of the Constitutional Democracy. In the book, he divided the Indonesian leadership into two categories. The first category is solidarity makers. The second one, in fact, is administrators. Solidarity makers are the leaders who have the skill to mobilize the masses. They often are good orators, you know. They were able to do a lot of things. However, they can do things when there is a kind of revolutionary situation. Once the country becomes stable, you need development, then solidarity makers cannot do much. Then you need administrators. Sukhano belongs to one particular category, the solidarity makers, while Hatta belongs to the second one, administrators. So in other words, you know, only when there is a kind of revolutionary situation, country is not yet very stable, then solidarity makers will be able to play an important role. And Indonesian situation in the 50s, especially during what you call the guided democracy, the period, in fact, is a situation where it was not very stable. Next, please. In fact, Sukhano initially was not in a position to be an authoritarian leader. However, the situation changed after 1958 when he introduced the guided democracy. He saw Indonesia as a leader in the international community, and he wanted to build the world anew. In fact, he made a speech in September 1960 in the United Nations, in which he divided the world into the what you call NEFOS, new emerging forces, and older force, all established forces. Of course, he's sided with the new emerging forces with very strong anti-colonialist sentiment. And it also sided with the PRC. When Malaysia was mooted and established, Sukhano considered Malaysia as the neo-colonialist project, and he wanted to crush it. So Malaysia, became the major target of Indonesian foreign policy of Sukhano. However, Malaysia eventually was accepted as a non-permanent member of the UN, United Nations Security Council. And Sukhano demanded that the United Nations reconsider. Being rejected, Sukhano eventually led Indonesia to withdraw from the United Nations. And then he established a rival institution, which was known as Conference of New Emerging Forces. He was supported by many communist states, especially China. But this Conference of New Emerging Forces were never realized. Nevertheless, you can see that the foreign policy of Indonesia during that particular time moved to the left, yet he still claimed that Indonesia continue to adopt the bebas dan aktif or independent and active foreign policy. And indeed, although it sided with the left-wing and communist countries, but there was no military alliance. Next, please. However, as far as Sukhano was concerned, he was unable to stay in power because the domestic situation was dynamic. There was two forces in contest for power, namely the PKI on the left and the army on the right. And Sukhano wanted to keep the balance between these two forces. When the balance was off, Sukhano was also pushed down. So the 1965, September coup led to the banning of the PKI, the fall of Sukhano, and the rise of Suharto. And from the beginning, Suharto was an authoritarian leader. And he ruled Indonesia, as everybody knows, at least for 32 years. And the Indonesian foreign policy had an imprint of Suharto. At that time, one can argue that the parliament was only a rubber stamp. After Suharto came to power for about 9 to 10 years, Indonesia invaded East Timor and eventually annexed East Timor. Because of this, Indonesia was very unpopular among the members of non-aligned movement. The annexation of East Timor was never recognized by the United Nations. I would argue that Suharto did not know much about foreign policy at the beginning. And then he was also not very confident, at least initially. On foreign policy, he relied on his capable foreign ministers, such as Adam Malik, is for 10 years, from 66 to 78. Mokhtar Kusumat Maja, also for another 10 years, from 78 to 88. and Ali Alatas from 1988 to 1998. But he continued to stay during the Habibie time for another year. So many people argue that he is the longest serving foreign minister of Indonesia. And gradually, Suharto became interested in foreign policy and was conscious of Indonesian position in the region, if not in the world. Next, please. And I would argue that after the 1982 general election, especially after he was elected as the president again in 1983, he became more confident and began to be actively involved in formulating Indonesian foreign policy. And he wanted to be recognized by the world, especially by the developing countries. You know, it's not surprising. In 1985, he initiated the 30th anniversary of Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung. And in this particular conference, China was also the president. During that time, there was no diplomatic tie yet, because the diplomatic tie was suspended in 1967. However, although about 100 countries attended this particular anniversary conference, but they were so divided, they were unable to reach any common resolution. So some of the observers says that in 1985, this 30th anniversary of Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung was a non-event. However, Suharto was very enthusiastic. He wanted to become the chairman of NAM. This is non-aligned movement. At that time, non-aligned movement was dominated by the Soviet Union. And Suharto sent his envoy in order to become the chairman in 1987 and 1988, in fact. However, he was rejected. Nevertheless, in 1991, he eventually succeeded to become the chairman of NAM. Yeah. And this was also coinciding with the disintegration of the Soviet Union. And in 1994, and Suharto Indonesia also succeeded in holding the Asia-Pacific Economic Community Summit. And so this is considered as quite prestigious. Although pro the West, Suharto did not allow foreign military base in the Indonesian territory. Therefore, Suharto foreign policy is still considered as a bebas active foreign policy of Indonesia. Next, please. If we look at, the foreign policy of Sukhano and Suharto, we can see that they are quite different. But there are also a few things which are quite similar, because both figures, in fact, one can argue about authoritarian figures. However, the difference is one was a civilian figure. They were not able to control the army. The other person was a military figure who controlled the army. And Sukhano, I would argue that Sukhano foreign policy has been described as a militant one. Why so? Because people were pointing to the liberation of West Irian. Yeah, because in 1961 and 62, all of you remember that this is a Trikora, so the Indonesian troop is moved into West Irian, and eventually West Irian was liberated. although I think the recognition only came, international recognition only happened in 1969. And another one is Crush Malaysia campaign. This is from 63 to 66. It is a kind of undeclared war. Some of the people argue. Yeah. However, some of the what do you call, covered individual was sent to Malaysia and Singapore to sabotage. In general, Sukhano foreign policy can be described as anti-colonialism. Yeah. Very strong one. And it was then Indonesia at that time was pro-China, anti-West. But the interesting thing here is this: it presented a challenge to the existing world order. Or do you remember that the speech that Sukhano made, about to build the world anew? In fact, he wanted to change the world order. However, Suharto foreign policy has been described as a moderate one, although it invaded East Timor and annexed East Timor in 1976. And so Sukhano liberations of West Irian, it was considered as part of Indonesia because the Republic of Indonesia was supposed to be based on the boundary of the Dutch East Indies, and West Irian was part of the West East Indies, part of the Dutch East Indies. Okay, we come back to the Suharto again, Suharto foreign policy. He annexed East Timor, of course, and then East Timor, became independent again. That was, I think, another story. But the interesting thing here I like to point out is this. Suddenly in 1996, Suharto was willing to have a dispute and with Malaysia on two islands, Legitan and Sipadan, via the international court, not resolved internally. And toward the end, by 2002, Legitan and Sipadan were awarded to Malaysia. Sukhano did not lose any territory, but Suharto, in fact, not only Indonesia eventually lost, in quotation mark, East Timor, also lost Legitan and Sipadan. Now, Suharto foreign policy was anti-China, pro-West, and unlike Sukhano, who challenged the world order, Suharto accepted the existing world order. Next, please. However, because of the social change, because of the economic crisis, because of the split in the army, and eventually Suharto had to step down. Just now, we already talked about the foreign policy of Sukhano and Suharto. But now I like to focus on the differences in foreign policy between Suharto era and Poswato era. Because Suharto was backed by the military, he got absolute presidential power. And the policy, in fact, could not be challenged by any other group. But after the fall of Suharto, the situation, of course, changed, you know. And the president had limited power. One can argue that parliament is more powerful. All the agreements made by the presidents have to be ratified by the parliament. If the parliament, if the president signed the agreement but not accepted by the parliament, then it would not become law. I think one of the examples, I think, is the what you call the extradition treaty and defense treaty between Indonesia and Singapore, and these were not ratified by the parliament. And also, when during Suharto time, you know, Suharto can just appointed the ambassadors, you know, as he wished. But after Suharto, ambassadors have to be endorsed by the parliament as well. Nevertheless, I would argue that Indonesian foreign policy elite during Suharto time, or even during the Sukhano era and the post-Suharto time, they share the common perception. What is the common perception? This is based on the following, the belief that as far as Indonesia is concerned, it is the largest countries in Southeast Asia with the largest population in Southeast Asia. Before it was number 5, but now it's number 4. And it has the largest economies in the region and the richest countries in the region. Because of this, many observers argue, including one of the leading analysts in Southeast Asian foreign policy, including Indonesian foreign policy, Mike Khalifa, he says that Indonesian elite, you know, have the entitlements, have the perception of the entitlement of the regional leadership because of this the belief that I just mentioned to you. Next, please. However, I should also pinpoint that during Suharto time, you know, and after Suharto, the international situations are not the same. You can see that after the stepping down of Suharto, in the international arena, you can see the relative declines of the US power and the rising China, which began to challenge the positions of the United States. China started to rise toward the end of the last century, in fact, as a result of the 4 modernization program introduced by Deng Xiaoping. A modernized industry, agriculture, military, and so forth. And it succeeded. So by the beginning of the 20th century, you can see that China foreign policy has become more militant, if not more aggressive. However, when Sukhano and Suharto play the leadership role in the region and beyond, China was poor and weak. China was unable to play the leading role by itself. Let us examine what Indonesia did after the fall of Suharto in the regional scene. Next, please. Okay, as I argued earlier, Suharto considered ASEAN as a cornerstone of the Indonesian foreign policy because it had the impression that it led ASEAN. And Suharto Indonesia was seen as an unofficial leader of ASEAN as well. But after the fall of Suharto, succeeding presidents were busy with domestic problems, especially Habibie and Gus Dur. The domestic issue, in fact, consumed most of their energies. And also, the years that they stayed in power was so short. One is a little bit more than 1 year, or the other one is about 2 years, less than 2 years. Nevertheless, the President Megawati attempted to revive Jakarta leadership in ASEAN by proposing ASEAN Security Community in Bali, this 2003, to make ASEAN a zone of peace and prosperity through her Foreign Minister Hassan Virayuda. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. No, the previous one, SBY. Right. No, after Megawati, the retired military general SBY became the president of Indonesia. Now, when we look at the writings about Indonesian foreign policy, then SBY is known as the foreign policy president. He had achieved significantly, was argued, in the foreign policy. However, he was initially not active in foreign policy because he was not familiar with Indonesian foreign policy in the first term in office. But he learned fast food, and then because economic development was and is still important, and then Indonesia, in fact, signed strategic partnership, which also include economic development with the PRC. But at the same time, it also signed similar strategic partnership with the US. Later, the strategic partnership was enhanced into the comprehensive strategic partnership with both countries. Nevertheless, I would like to argue that the Jakarta appears to be closer to Washington than to Beijing, and especially in the security field. And SBY, I think, was a very, what should I say, quite experienced the president, and familiar with the situation in the region and beyond. He established harmonious relationship with the neighbors. Of course, I mean, he was also able to establish good relation with the United States. And with the neighbors, the haze issue was handled quite effectively. and gain the respect of the neighbors. And Indonesia at that time wanted to show the world, no, at least wanted to show the members of ASEAN it was able to lead. So when Cambodia and Thailand came into conflict over a temple, this is Priya Vihar Temple in 2011. And Indonesia offered the good office, but it did not stop the fighting between these two countries. And eventually, it was the International High Court which resolved the issue. And this temple was awarded to Cambodia. So in that sense, perhaps, I think the Indonesian mediation was not successful. In 2012, as many of you know, ASEAN failed to issue a joint communique due to the South China Sea issue. SBY, in fact, instructed his foreign minister Marty to conduct the shuttle diplomacy, and eventually Indonesia succeeded in having a joint communique. Next, please. Next, please. This is a contrast. Yeah, this Jokowi was named as infrastructure project president because he was not interested in traditional foreign policy. Nevertheless, his foreign minister Retno Marsudi attempted to play a role, perhaps a leading role in ASEAN. There are three examples here that I can give, in which Indonesia, in fact, was trying to get involved in the formulation of a number of important concepts. First is the Indo-Pacific concept. As all of you, I think many of you, I think, are fully aware that this Indo-Pacific concept was first initiated, by Japanese Prime Minister Abe in 2007, and then it later developed, into the free and open Indo-Pacific (FOIP), and adopted by the previous president of the United States, Donald Trump. But this particular concept was seen to have been made in order to contain China. Well, Indonesia, Retno, in fact, was also eager to develop the concept, which is more inclusive. And eventually, it managed to have the Indo-Pacific concept proposed by Indonesia. And this concept, after a discussion, was eventually accepted by ASEAN. And it becomes ASEAN view on the Indo-Pacific outlook. Nevertheless, Indonesian name was not mentioned. And this ASEAN view on the Indo-Pacific outlook was also an outline rather than a very substantive program. Now, the most recent one here, I think it is still in progress, is the Indonesian concern with the Myanmar crisis. We know that on February the 1st, 2021, Myanmar military staged a coup. overthrew Aung San Suu Kyi. Aung San Suu Kyi, the government, and then it eventually it also arrested Aung San Suu Kyi and the president and introduced the martial law for another year. And a number of ASEAN countries, namely Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, are very concerned with the Myanmar crisis. And especially after the suppression imposed by the junta. And Retno started to conduct her subtle diplomacy. She flew to what we call Brunei, which is the chair at the moment, the current chair of ASEAN. And then she also flew to Singapore. And then she even wanted to talk to the new junta-appointed foreign minister of Myanmar, in Myanmar, but changed the schedule because of the demonstration which took place in front of the Indonesian embassy in Yangon. However, I managed to see the envoy of Myanmar in Thailand, together with the foreign minister of Thailand. And after the meeting on the 2nd of March, I think, and the unofficial virtual meeting of the foreign policy of ASEAN was eventually held. Nevertheless, it seems that both sides didn't want too much. So President Jokowi was concerned, I think, with the situation in Myanmar. And on the 19th of March, he called for a high-level meeting of ASEAN. The crisis is still on. The meeting has not been held yet. Next, please. But the third, next, please. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. Okay, in fact, one thing which was often ignored, I think, was the Jokowi presidency. Was the the effort made by President Jokowi, on promoting or enhancing the status of Palestinians, and especially in the OIC, Organizations of Islamic Conference. Although one can argue it was not new. because even SBY also attended the OIC, and Jokowi followed this kind of tradition. He also attended OIC and defended the Palestinian state. But I would argue that he went further when Donald Trump made a decision to move US Embassy to Jerusalem on the 6th of December 2017. Jokowi expressed his opposition, and on the 11th of December, Jokowi attended the OIC, the meeting, to support the establishment of the Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Of course, for the infrastructure project, the president, why was he, concerned with this? I would argue that it has something to do with the domestic politics in Indonesia at that particular time, because of the radical Islam, especially because of the identity, the politics. And Jokowi had to show that he was indeed, supporting the Muslims in the Middle East. I would argue that Islam has become a consideration in Indonesian foreign policy, but it has not become the basis of Indonesian foreign policy. Next, please. I think I still have 10 minutes. Next, please. Yeah. We can also see the international role of Indonesia through the Afro-Asian conference here. All of us remember in 1955, there was the first Bandung conference. Of course, Indonesia's role was very important, but equally important was also the role of India, Nehru especially, and also Zhou Enlai. Without these two, then Afro-Asian conference in Bandung would have not been realized. Having said that, I still want to argue that the role of Indonesia was tremendously important. And the fact is this was held in Bandung, and it is also known as the Bandung spirit. And this Bandung spirit, like peaceful coexistence, of different political system, try to use the peaceful means to resolve conflict and so forth. The principle are still the golden principle for the peace of the world today. And in fact, Jamie Mackey was saying that because of this Afro-Asian conference, for the first time, he said, the United States and the Soviet Union heard the voice of Afro-Asian people. Before this, the voice of Afro-Asian people were not heard. And knowing the importance of the Afro-Asian conference, Suharto was also eager to have a say, to have a hand in this. I already talked about the 30th anniversary of Afro-Asian Conference, which was held in Indonesia by Suharto in 1985, which was too divided. They produced no resolution, and it was said as a non-event. And what about during the SBY time? President SBY in fact, revived the conference in 2035. It was the 50th anniversary of Afro-Asian, the conference. But he thought that the Afro-Asian, the conference, was no longer that relevant. Therefore, he amended the name to New Afro-Asian Strategic Partnership, in which, in fact, he talked about the Palestinian, in which he also talked about the economic cooperation, because economic issue has become much more important than anything else. Some people argue, well, okay, I mean, this was with limited success. But during the Jokowi time, Jokowi was also made use of the opportunity to hold the Afro-Asian, the conference. This is the 30th anniversary. Xi Jinping also attended. This is the chairman of the PRC. Xi Jinping also attended. And then again, this reminded people of Indonesia again. I would argue that it is also with a very limited success. Next, please. So what should we say about Indonesian role in the international affairs? What should we say about Indonesian aspiration to international role? I would maintain the Indonesian foreign policy elite today still feel that Indonesia should play a major role in regional affairs, if not in the world affairs, due to the belief that Indonesia is the largest country rich of resources. It's the largest country in Southeast Asia anyway. And in the past used to play such a role. And this may also be encouraged by the possibility of Indonesia becoming a developed country in the next decades or next 2 decades. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the economic setback, it is still a question mark if Indonesia would achieve the developed country status by, say, 2030. In terms of capability, Indonesia, in fact, is still quite limited. The military capability, the economic and political influence are still lacking. There is also a lack of political leader who would be eager to lead. Next, please. Next slide, please. But in my view, Southeast Asia is a very strategic place here. It would become, or it has become, an important area for the contest of the two superpowers or two major powers, i.e. the United States and China. And what is the Indonesian role here? I think is also quite important. As all of us know, Indonesia wanted to become bebas dan aktif, is independent and active foreign policy. It didn't want to take side. And perhaps I think many countries, just like Indonesia, they didn't want to take side in the disputes between the two major powers. And Indonesia, as the largest country in the region, may be forced to play an important role again in ASEAN. However, Indonesian capability, as I mentioned earlier, quite limited. And there is also an absence of the foreign policy president in Indonesia. So a question here is should be answered or can be discussed is Indonesia ready to play the regional role again? Thank you very much. I speak for 52 minutes.
Leo, for your
That's all. Perhaps I think we can have question and answer.
yes, of course. So before that, Professor Leo, I missed to read out your curriculum vitae. So I have to do it first. Reading you the your curriculum vitae here. So Professor Leo Suryadinata, Ph.D., is currently visiting Senior Fellow, ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute, Singapore, and Professor Adjunct to Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University. He was formerly professor in the Department of Political Science, National University of Singapore, and he has published extensively on Indonesian politics, Indonesia's foreign policy, ethnic Chinese in South Asia, and China-ASEAN relations.
Yeah.
His latest book is The Rise of China and the Chinese Overseas, Beijing's Policy in Southeast Asia and Beyond, 2017. And Politik Luar Negeri Indonesia di bawah Suharto, 2019, second printing. That's the short CV of Professor Leo. Okay, now we'll open the session of questions and answer. There are now already 3 persons who are actually about to ask you the questions, Professor. The first is coming from Wendy Prajuli. Wendy, please proceed with your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Aryadi, and thank you, Pak Leo. Pak Leo explained that from Suharto to Jokowi, they are failed to use African ASEAN Conference to build Indonesian leadership international. My question is, does it mean that African ASEAN Conference has lost its momentum to be used for Indonesian as the instrument for Indonesia to become a international leader, and also does it mean that Indonesia has to be more creative to find another way or instrument to be used for develop or build its international leadership, something like that? That's my question. Thank you.
Should I answer the question one by one, or you want to collect a few questions first? Or may I answer the question? Mas,
I think we have to pull all the questions first, and then later you answer. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, fine.
Now it's Farhan Julianto, please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, Professor Leo Suryadinata and Dr. Haryadi. Uh, in the near future, Indonesia will become the chair of ASEAN in the 2023. Based on the current Jokowi's presidency, can you give your argument about what issue Indonesia should prioritize in 2023? Thank you.
Thank you, Farhan. And now the third question will be from Rifki Danaswara. Please, Rifki.
Okay. Good afternoon, Professor Leo. Thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to ask, with the current situation of international politics developing into a more bipolar system between China and the US, I would like to ask how Indonesian ambition to international leadership interwoven with the rivalry. Like, will the situation become an opportunity for Indonesia to show its leadership, like with the non-bloc movement? Or like with the US and China try to block or undermine attempts by Indonesia to show its leadership because it doesn't like any other countries to become much more prevalent than they are. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rifki. And please,
Yeah.
Professor.
In fact, I missed the third question. Can you repeat the third question, please? The third one.
Okay, so I would like to ask how international rivalry between China and the US will affect Indonesian ambition to become international leadership. Like, will it become an opportunity, or will the current situation become an obstacle with the US and China block or undermine attempts by Indonesia to show its leadership?
Okay, thank you. Okay, I try to answer the three questions. I think the first one about the what can Indonesia do, you see, in order to play a major role again. The underlying argument that I put forward here, perhaps I think is not stressed or not emphasized, is this. A country which would like to play a leading role has to be a country which is strong. A weak country cannot play diplomacy. A poor country cannot play diplomacy. Therefore, most important for Indonesia, I think, is how to strengthen the country capabilities so that the countries would look at Indonesia, as a kind of example, if not inspiration. That one, I think, is quite important. So far, I think, as far as Indonesia is concerned, yeah, economically, I think it is improving. Capability-wise, I think it is still quite limited. To become a leader in Southeast Asia and beyond, you need to have economic and political influence. Economic and political influence based on just large population, rich resources, and large countries would not be able to make Indonesia to play an international leadership successfully. Yeah. If you ask me, what can Indonesia do, with this kind of capability? Since Indonesian political and foreign policy elite continue, I think, to have the perception that Indonesia should play a major role. What sort of mechanism or what sort of proposal that Indonesia can use? when the question was asked to me, okay, Afro-Asian concept now is no longer relevant. So if you want to exercise your leadership role, then perhaps you need to look for another format. But I would argue, though, as far as the Afro-Asian role, especially what you call the Bandung spirit, which I mentioned just now, was still quite useful. And this kind of Bandung spirit, in my view, should be sustained, should be retained, and should be developed. Perhaps I think should be applied. Because if you only allow one type of political system existed in the regions or in the world, it seems that it is rather difficult, if it's not impossible. It needs times, I think, in order to adjust. Okay, what about this? I try to answer the question about whether or not that the two power struggle here will present an opportunity or danger to Indonesia. I think in my view, this is a fact that there are now two major powers. But militarily, it has been argued that China, in fact, was not really a world power yet. It is a regional power. But in this region, it wanted to be recognized. Now, this then up to the ASEAN, Indonesia included, how to be able to get united, to make a united presentation without really choosing the country, without choosing the side. Because if we choose one side, I am sure that it would not bring benefit to the ASEAN states. Because one side would not be happy, and damage and sabotage or even a damage would be inflicted, I think, on the ASEAN members. So I think it seems to me that Indonesia, I think, has a lot of things to do too. Being a big country in Southeast Asia, how would Indonesia be able to make the ASEAN state be united? It is not easy. Because as you can see, is that the interest, the national interest of the Indo-Chinese states, for instance, which are very close geographically to China, were very different from the maritime states of Southeast Asia. Because ASEAN, in fact, is too big. ASEAN has included to many countries. This is a challenge for Indonesia how to make use of the situation in order to do this. And as I pointed out in my concluding remark, you also need a president who is active in foreign policy, who believes that foreign policy, in fact, would benefit the country. Without such the president, then I think it seems to me that it would be difficult for Indonesia to play a leading role again. So the second question about the chair in ASEAN, in fact, has also been answered with my explanation earlier. Yeah, thank you.
Now, the third out question, sir?
Yes, is there any other question?
Okay, thank you. They ask one from Maharani Fersi. Please, Maharani.
Hello, good afternoon, Professor Leo. My
Yeah.
name is Zani. I want to ask you about the Indonesia involvement in Indo-Pacific region. You said earlier that Indonesia proposed the concept and using ASEAN as an incubator for the concept. However, the concept was accepted by ASEAN, but not mentioning Indonesia as the pioneer of the concept. The first question is there any hidden reason why Indonesia wants to be involved in the IOR by using ASEAN? And the second question, why Indonesia or ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific took a long time to make, since it was known from 2007 and by the former Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, Martina Talagawa, on his speech on 2011. Thank you.
Yeah. Should I answer the question or you want to take more questions, please? Should I answer the question or you want to take Kemasar, should I take the question? Should I answer the question now or should I wait? Okay, I just answered the question then. Yeah, Rani, thank you for the question. Yeah, when Marty, I think, was asked about the Indo-China Pacific, at that time, the United States was not really interested in the concept. And also, Marty, in fact, responded to that particular the concept. But instead of having a new mechanism, it was put under the existing structure. This concept became important, quote unquote, after the president of the United States, Trump, picked up the concept, and in order to contain China. Then Indonesia Foreign Ministry began to come in again and to re-examine the concept. But as far as this one is Indo-Pacific concept. But at the moment, I think it is still very early. You see. And you have, what should I say, the skeletons and so forth. But the meat, I think, was not there yet. And especially if it is seen as an economic cooperation as well. Nevertheless, the concept proposed, this FOIP concept proposed by by Japan and the United States and also Australia and so forth were meant, I mean, to contain China, then it is impossible for the ASEAN to accept this kind of the concept. But Indo-Pacific concept include Southeast Asia, especially Indonesia. And it is said that Indonesia, in fact, is in the center of the Indo-Pacific concept. Therefore, whether you like it or not, that Indonesia was forced into that kind of situation for Indonesia to react. And because the term Indo-Pacific has been seen as a color of the West, so China, in fact, was reluctant to accept the Indo-Pacific concept. Yet it was in the interest of Indonesia to play a significant role in the Indo-Pacific in order to protect its own national interests. So it proposed a very inclusive concept. It is argued it was quite difficult to implement. And then it was also said that in the present concept of ASEAN, what it's called ASEAN outlook of Indo-Pacific, the concept, there were a lot of pitfalls which have to be filled in and developed. It is only a work in progress. So it is still quite far, I think, for the countries, I think, to quote, implement, unquote, I think the concept. Perhaps I think I stop there.
So much, Professor. Now, the next question would be from Sila Jasmine. Priscilla.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Haryadi, and thank you, Prof. Leo Suryadinata, for the given opportunity and for your most comprehensive presentation. So I would like to ask about the projection of Indonesia's capability on settling down Myanmar crisis now. So do you think that Indonesia will be or is able to push ASEAN to mediate and settle down the Myanmar crisis, or do you think that we should have gone another way, such as doing a bilateral negotiation with some political and economically powerful countries from Myanmar, such as Singapore or China, to help settling down the crisis? I guess that may be important to for us to know how powerful Indonesia's leadership in region, I guess. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, as far as Indonesia is concerned, this is the shuttle diplomacy was conducted. It did not only represent the view of Indonesia, it also represents the view of Singapore as well as Malaysia. And Indonesia also consulted China. Not that Indonesia, independently work alone. No. In fact, it's consulted China, consulted other countries, I think, as well. But the problem, I think, here is this. To deal with the situation in Myanmar, I think it's not easy. My guess is this. Indonesia and also the countries of the same view on Myanmar believe that as far as the Myanmar situation now is concerned, it is different from the 1988. Do you remember this 1988? In fact, there was a student movement. And then also Aung San Suu Kyi, the party, was elected into the government. However, the military did not allow the Aung San Suu Kyi to resume, to assume power. And then she was in fact detained, you know. She was in a house arrest for so many years. And there was opposition, even demonstration against the military rule, but very easily quelled down, very easily suppressed. However, the situation today, it is argued, is slightly or to a more significant extent, you know, different from the 1988 situation. Why? Because there was a subtle social change in Myanmar. The opposition group, the populists, in fact, they have grown stronger. So they could not be suppressed just overnight, you know. Can you imagine this from the 1st of February until now, the demonstration continue, you know. And then suppressions was also on. And a lot of people were killed. Yet the demonstration, the protest remained. And in addition to this, the external factors here, external factor is important here. And the external forces now were in support of the democratic movement, of the demonstrators. And it seems that it is not going to disappear overnight. So what does it mean? Which means that both sides, you know, will continue, I think, to do what they wanted to do. And perhaps I think it was argued toward the end, the military junta would discover that it would not be possible for them not to negotiate. That it will force the junta to negotiate. However, whether or not that it means that the democratic forces are going to take over. No, or not yet. We do not really know. But the most important is both sides had to negotiate and then reduce the casualties, you know, and then make sure that there is no further bloodshed. But unfortunately, we have not seen the light in the tunnel yet. We don't know this sort of thing is going to happen. And apparently, even China, for instance, and the Soviet, no more Soviet, sorry, Russia, are seen as being the backers of the junta. Yet China make it very explicit. No, we are behind ASEAN. Then within ASEAN, as all of us know, there are two views. some didn't want to intervene. They say that, oh, this is not our business, you know, non-interventions in the charter, blah, blah, blah. But some only express concern, no action are taken. So even now, the ASEAN view were not united yet. The high-level meeting proposed by President Jokowi has not materialized. So if you ask me, will there be a bright future? I'm afraid that I have not seen the light in the tunnel yet. Sorry for being rather pessimistic.
Well, thank you, Professor Leo. I think this question would be the last one. Yeah. From Bintang Langit, please, Bintang.
Good afternoon, Professor Leo. I would like to ask you a question regarding Indonesia's hopes on becoming a global power. As you stated before, to achieve global power status, a country must need a high level of both military and economic strength, and also political strength too. To achieve said status, what should Indonesia achieve first, a strong military or a strong economy? For example, Japan achieved great power status through its military strength before World War II against Russia, and through economic strength after rebuilding the nation. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, I think a moment ago, I argued the important foundation for being a global power, you see. And Indonesia at the moment, I think, is still considered as a medium power. And to become a global power, of course, a lot of Indonesians are having this beautiful dream. Yes, but apart from Indonesia, there are also many other countries, you know, who are wishing, if not dreaming, to become global powers. For instance, even India. But to be a global power, I mean, not only the global power, to be a power to be recognized with. Nowadays, economic situation is most important. Even if you want to have a military power, without the solid economic and technological foundation, you will not be able to become a global power at all. Not global power, even the power, even a strong regional power, you would not be able to achieve that. Therefore, the economic foundation is most important. Technology, especially today, because this economy is linked to technology. And technology here is also linked to education. Perhaps I think one can argue that you need to study the Indonesian, environment, the Indonesian condition now. How to make Indonesia a better country, economically, technologically, and culturally. But once you achieve this kind of thing, it seems to me that other things will follow, Because once you are strong economically, and then you begin to see other things, So to make it short, Yeah, I think it is not easy to become the global power to begin with. But domestically, Indonesia has to become economically and technologically very strong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Leo, for your arguments, your presentations, your views on all questions that have been asked to you. And I would also try to say a bit on the questions given by friends here, that you have posed questions in the very precise on what the situation been facing by Indonesia today. And Professor Leo has come to the argument that all the situations should come back to the inner position that have been taken by the governments and peoples of Indonesia to actually take care of the situation surrounded. Yeah. Well, once again, thank you so much, Professor Leo, for your presentation, for your answers on this question and answer. And
I would like to express my thanks to you for inviting me, and then to all the participants, and please stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you. You too. We'll see you in Singapore.
Thank you. Yeah. See you again sometime, somewhere.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you
Bye.
so much. Thank you. Bye.
Jangan pergi dulu, Mas.
This.
Baik, terima kasih banyak sekali lagi atas kesempatannya Prof. Leo dan Mas Haryadi yang sudah memandu acara ini. Rupanya informasi hari ini itu sangat menggugah dan juga cukup menarik melihat bagaimana peran Indonesia di dalam region maupun isu Afrika dan Asia di tengah adanya persaingan bilateral antara Amerika Serikat dan China. And thank you again for Prof. Leo. You're so eloquent for these topics. And to answer the question, is Indonesia still aspiring leadership in international international area? Maybe the answer is Indonesia is possible, but quite limited. And how Indonesian overcome the limitation, it will be interesting things to look forward to. And ada banyak juga pertanyaan dan tanggapan menarik dari para hadirin, namun kami mohon maaf karena keterbatasan waktu, kami harus mengakhiri sesi tanya jawab yang ada di hari ini. Dan sebelum menutup acara kali ini, saya ingin meminta seluruh peserta untuk dapat on cam sebentar untuk dapat diambil gambarnya oleh panitia. Before closing these events, I will ask to the participants to open the camera, so the committee can take our photos together. Okay, everyone has opened the camera.
Noval.
Okay.
Aba-abanya dari saya ya. Mungkin kita tunggu, ada beberapa yang belum menyalakan kamera.
Baik, Farhan.
Oke, kita mulai saja ya. Ada kurang lebih 4 slide. Untuk slide pertama, 1, 2, 3. Oke, ditahan. Oke. Lanjut ke slide kedua. 1, 2, 3. Makasih, lanjut ke slide ketiga. Tahan ya, 1, 2, 3. Slide terakhir. 1, 2, 3. Oke, udah saya kembalikan pada Nova.
Thank you Farhan, telah membantu mengambil gambar kali ini. Sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih banyak kepada Prof. Leo, juga kepada Mas Har. Menutup acara ini, saya ucapkan terima kasih sebesar-besarnya kepada semua pihak yang sudah terlibat, dan mohon maaf atas segala kekurangan dalam penyelenggaraan acara ini. Dan dari saya, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kita akan berjumpa lagi di kegiatan Departemen HI berikutnya.